I'm now going to request Krish to join me. I'll again reintroduce Krish. Krish is currently the Head of Human Resources for Infosys. Can we have a round of applause for him? And there's a mic for you there. And before that, he has had an absolute stellar career which has spanned very different kind of industries. So he has seen the conventional FMCG. He has seen telecom in its absolute growth phase when it was exploding. And now he is seeing IT. So very interesting perspective he will bring. So I'm going to ask him a few questions and try and get some answers. And then collectively towards the end, we can all ask questions. We'll take a few questions and try and solve for it. Yeah. So thank you, Krish, for being here. You want to just check if your mic is working?
Hello. Yeah.
Good, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure being here.
Thank you. So Krish, as you heard the stuff that I spoke about, personally for you, what resonates most? To say, how can one get better? What are the concepts that work deeply for you?
No, I think after hearing from him and also reading his book, two things really strike me. Yeah? I think, people, most of us, we don't consciously look at how do we improve. Yeah? We don't look at it consciously. The minute we try and think about it consciously and say, okay, what is my model of getting better, then I think we'll get huge benefits from it. I think what most of us do is that we do our day-to-day work, we kind of attend meetings, we do all the stuff that it is, but consciously not thinking, how can I get better? Yeah? And I think the first one is to bring some conscious thought. And that's where his whole idea about this whole getting better model, about what is your model of getting better? And he spoke about the 3 levers that you can use. I think that's very, very important. I think if you go back to a little bit of theory, if you look at some of the HR theory that is there, whenever people learn, I think what people have found is, before you start reading, watching a video or learning something, if you think about, okay, what am I going to learn from this and how am I going to learn? If you just think for 10 minutes, not even 10 minutes, whatever it is, that makes your learning much more better from that, whatever you're doing, even attending a training program or watching a video or something. So I think this whole idea about what is your model and how am I going to learn, just thinking about it is going to make a big difference. Yeah? So that's number one. I think the second thing is the whole idea about reflection. Once you've done something and you say, okay, what can I learn? So it doesn't mean that I can keep doing the same thing. You won't be improving doing the same thing, but you got to do something different. You can't keep, hitting against the wall and think the results will be different. You got to say, okay, what can I do slightly differently? What can I learn? And that's where you start taking those benefits. And the other insight that I also find is these benefits are actually quite what I call geometrical in their thing. Every time you keep doing it, the benefits can be much larger and larger. It's not incremental, but slowly you'll find that over some time, there is this tipping point, and I think you'll really reach at a much higher level. Yeah? So I think that conscious thinking is very important. And the last point that before I go on, is one of the points that he mentioned in his book, is whenever we kind of enter into any role or something, there are 2 things. One is our ability to spot some things to change, and the ability to execute the change. Yeah? So these are the 2 things. So whenever we look at it, we say, okay, what is it that I should change? When you look at a new job or a new situation, I think you should start thinking about it. And that you'll find only when you're aware, when you're having lots of ideas in your mind, you can say, okay, what can I change? But to get the change, you got to also have something very different. You got to work hard at it. So those are some of the concepts that I think clearly were very, very interesting from whatever I picked in your book.
Thank you, Krish. And I just want to build on this geometric progression of getting better. So one of the terms I use is getting better is like compound interest. And compound interest, there are 2 things. One is, the earlier you make the first deposit, the longer it works. Yeah. So you have started your getting better journey, the earlier you start, the longer it works. That is, I think, the first principle. And second, you have to be consistent. You have to say, every year I am working at it. Yeah. So if we get that principle, you will see that you start making small deposits early on. The interest in the first year, the second year is nothing great. And sometimes we can feel, what am I getting out of it? But the interest in the 15th year of the deposit that you made 15 years back is phenomenal. Yeah. So I think we have to think of it as like compound interest and be at it. So Krish, you have had a phenomenal career. Almost everybody here would like to have a great career. Yeah. So if you look back at your career and say, what are the 1 or 2 things which helped you succeed, which made you successful, what would you say are those 1 or 2 things? What can they learn from your life?
That's see, it's a tough one because I think each one is got their own career, their own likes, dislikes, and sometimes there is luck. I think in all of this, you should also know that there is a little bit of luck in everything. Timing and luck is also very important. So I think we should also keep that in mind because two people may be doing the same thing. Sometimes there's always good luck with somebody and right timing in certain things. I think if I were to look at it, there were two things that I would think. One is, I think, is the kind of bosses and mentors that I had. I think that has been very important. Right from the day I joined Levers and then some of the leaders that were there in Levers. So I worked in Levers for about 20 years. And many of the things that I learned from them and I watched them work, I think have been, just watching them in action was great. That really was like a classroom, Sitting and listening to training sessions is one, but even in meetings, even in interviews that you keep watching them. So I think I picked a lot from many of them. That's one. I think the second thing was, the one that I always found was, you always have to try and make some mistakes. You try and do something, but there'll always be some mistake. And I made many mistakes, And in my career, I was in HR, then I moved out of HR for about 4 years in Levers. I was running the exports business. Then I came back to HR. So different things I did. But I think the one thing is, try and do something new. But when you're trying to do something new, always try and see what can I learn from it. What is it? How is it going to do? How is it going to help you? Steve Jobs. You've heard of Steve Jobs, and this always comes to my mind. Steve Jobs is a guy, and you can't sitting now. You can't connect your dots in the future. Yeah, you can only connect them at the in hindsight. And Steve Jobs was somebody who did, he dropped out from college, but he went and attended a class on, what do you call, calligraphy. Yeah, that's the thing. He did this class on calligraphy because he liked it. And then that's it. But after he came back and he started, creating his whole, Apple and things, the fonts that he got in and the design that he got in all came a little bit out of that calligraphy. Therefore, he could connect those dots, and therefore we always we can connect those dots. But I think we got to be looking for it. We got to be looking, saying, okay, what am I learning? How can I use it? And therefore, one of the things that Mouli also mentioned, that as you grow higher in your career, one of the things that you got to pick up is this ability to connect the dots, to see patterns, the conceptualization ability. And the learning will only come through that conceptualization ability. All of them see the same thing. But there'll be somebody who can link those 4 or 5 things and say, okay, this is what is happening, yeah? And to do that is what you got to train your mind, and that's where your learning goes the maximum. How can you derive concepts out of watching things? How can you derive patterns out of watching things? And I think that's something which I learned over time by trying different things, failing many times, but also being supported by bosses.
Fantastic. No, and I think the fact is that great bosses and great mentors help you succeed. But those people who were Krish's bosses were bosses for many other people also. All of them possibly did not succeed to the same extent. So a great boss is a factor, but what you learn from that great boss is also an important factor. So what did you do to make sure that you're actually learning from those great bosses? What was there in your approach?
Okay. No, I think one is conscious. I think firstly, it's a mindset. You got to say, okay, how can I learn? What should I learn? Yeah. And secondly, I think it needs a little bit of humility. To be honest, when I was young, I was not like one of those flashy guys who will go and speak. I was a little bit underconfident. And because I was underconfident, I was trying to say, okay, how can I improve? Yeah. And I think a little bit of humility always helps us do a little bit more. Yeah. So I think humility is important. And then when as Mouli said, when you watch them, you say, okay, this is how, for example, I was sitting with interviews with many people, Vindi Baga and Harish Manwani were 2 chairmen of Unilever, and I was in recruitment those days. And we used to do interviews, and I used to sit with them. And the learning that I got from them, just being in that half an hour, 45-minute interview was phenomenal, because I learned all about marketing, I learned about the company strategy, and I learned about what things are happening. And therefore, when I did that, I went and when I did my interviews, I'll try the same thing. I'll try and use those things that it helped me. It kind of, you got to practice a little bit. You got to pick up some things, you got to practice, and you say, okay, how can I build on it? So I think to kind of try and get some concepts out of this. When you watch these leaders, I think you got to keep an open mindset about what can I learn. And when you try and learn, try and practice and say, okay, how can I improve? And I think keep that as a kind of virtuous loop of continuous improvement.
Thank you. And I think one of the tips from my side on learning from bosses is when you're sitting in a meeting and your boss says something impressive, or you're with the chairman or you're with a senior person, they say something impressive, we get impressed. But what we have got impressed by is the answer they have given. And what I want you to do sitting there is to try and think about how did they get to this answer. Yeah, they got to the right answer which we could not see, and we say, wow. But I want you to spend time thinking about how did they get to this answer. Yeah, build that habit and you will see that you are just actually absorbing like a sponge from them. So Krish, we are in Bangalore. All of you are in Bangalore. I am an outsider. I come from Bombay. And Bangalore for me is just quite remarkable in its IT industry, in its startup ecosystem, the attitude and spirit of people towards digital, towards startups. I mean, there seems to be a lot of courage here in startups and in IT. So if we look at people in the IT ecosystem and in startups and digital world, what do you think are some of the most important things for successful careers in these spaces?
Yeah. No, I think Bangalore is, let's say, it's the heart of technology of India and the heart of innovation that's happening around in India. Yeah. But if you look at the IT industry, and IT industry basically is not just one IT industry, it's got different parts. There is this products industry, there are companies that make IT products. There are IT services companies like Infosys and Wipro and TCS and others based here. There are ITES, BPOs and various other things, they're also part of that. So there is a large number of, and a lot of these startups use IT in a big way. If you look at all the startups that have come out of here, IT is a part of the thing. So therefore, there are various elements of IT that is there. The one thing that is happening in IT is compared to other industries, and I've worked for 20 years in FMCG and now 4 years in IT, is that the rate of change of technology in IT is much higher. Yeah. So the half-life of learning is pretty high and pretty low in the sense that whatever I learn in the next 2 years, it will kind of get obsolete because you got to learn something new. So therefore, the two things that is happening in IT, the domain, the what you got to learn keeps changing very fast. Yeah. So unless you improve the how you're learning, this what is going to be a big challenge for all of us sitting in this industry. Because every year, every 2 years, something new is coming, and the domain part, the what of it is changing continuously. 3 years from now, it's going to be completely different. So I think the challenge for us is that what is changing, so we got to keep on doing it. But what we can do better is to improve the how we are learning, So therefore, how you learn is very important. And I think in the IT industry, what happens is a lot of youngsters come in, they learn, but there is a little bit of stagnation of people after about 10, 12 years. What happens, they learned, and after that, they're like, most of them kind of, get kind of stuck. Only a few kind of make this jump. And who are the ones who make the jump? I think you got to find out why. I think two things happen. I think they make the jump because they are able to think conceptually and make that one big jump to a next level. Yeah. Otherwise, most people are stuck. So therefore, thinking about patterns, thinking about business models, using your conceptual ability to learn is very important to go from that middle level to the next level. And number two, you got to be an expert. You got to build something in which you are an expert. If you're not, you'll be stuck in the middle. Either you're an expert in your domain or expert in technology, you got to learn that. So I think these are the two important things. You become an expert, or you try and learn from whatever is happening and leapfrog a level where you got to improve your conceptual abilities, your ability to think differently about business models, and your ability to really, be more consultative. That doesn't come to all the people. So I think for us in IT, again, as I said, two big challenges. Lots of change. We got to keep learning. The what of learning keeps changing, so we got to do that. And to improve that, we got to, look at how we are learning much more. But the big challenge for most of the IT people is you can do quite a lot, but after 10, 12 years, the learning kind of, stagnates. So what you do is very important. You got to either be an expert and keep learning in how to do that, or you got to really become a leader in a much more broader conceptual way to lead a business. So I think those are big challenges for us.
Fantastic. Again, I just want to paraphrase the what and the how. So basically what I'm hearing is, so if I'm in a FMCG industry and if I have to be successful in 2019, then what I knew at the end of 2018 is going to be 90% of my success in 2019 is going to come from what I knew at the end of 2018. I might have to learn 5 or 10% new, because that is the pace of change in that industry. But if I am in a high change domain, right, then maybe my success this year, only 60% is dependent on what I knew at the end of last year. Maybe 40% I have to learn and execute this year, right? So in a way, the stress on your learning. So if you have to learn, again, I use numbers to say if I have to learn 10 units in FMCG per year, I have to possibly learn 50 units per year in IT. Yeah. Now, there are two ways of getting there. One is to say, I predict the what. Oh, 5 years later, this is going to be important. 10 years later, this is going to be important. And I start focusing on that. That can help. But the more important is the how, the speed of learning. To say how much ever I try, I can't predict it. So when change happens, I must be so fast in learning that I'm able to deal with it. Yeah, so that's, I think, the way of thinking about it. You saw Unilever at a very conventional kind of industry in a very stable phase. Then you saw Airtel in possibly its most explosive phase as the head of HR at Airtel. And exceptional rapid growth at that time. So what are some of the challenges that come with rapid growth in terms of people learning, inventing themselves? Many people want to scale up their businesses and organizations. What are some of the thoughts that you would have in terms of rapid growth and managing it?
Yeah. No, I think, again, Airtel, when I joined Airtel 2007, early 2007, I think the number of customers was roughly about, 10 million or something like that. And over 8 years, it grew to almost 200 million. So that's the pace of change in terms of how the company grew. So what are some of the challenges there? I think firstly, growth is a great addictive. You know, people like it because, you tend to, it provides opportunities for people to grow. It provides many opportunities. So therefore, growth is good because it's like an engine and there's things that move around it. But what are the challenges? I think people think that by doing the same thing, you will reach the next level. Yeah, that's not what it is. You're a good salesman. You're like, growing your territory by whatever, 25, 30% every year. But, from an area salesman to becoming kind of a zonal manager is a bit different. So you just can't just say, because I'm growing at 30% next year, I want to be. You can't, because you've got to build some new capabilities. I think that is one of the challenges that we had, that people's expectations were far higher than the capabilities that were needed at the next high level. So I think we got to manage that. And you got to manage that in a nice way, because everybody is growing. You need that. You can't say, listen, you're not fit for it because everybody is growing. Growth is positive. But with that positive thing, you got to ensure that there are new capabilities that are built in. And to do that, you got to tell them to learn about what is needed to be successful in the next level. Yeah, I think this word that Marshall Goldsmith used in his book, what got you here so far is not going to get you here to the whatever, next thing. I think that's a very nice way, to kind of put it. These guys are very good at this, but you're now moving to a next level where you want something very different. And I think people first don't know it. So I think we got to make people think about it. So those were the challenges about fast growth, high expectations, people not having the capability to actually do a bigger role, but they're expecting because things are growing. And sometimes, because you need more people, some of these people get promoted. So we got to ensure that we give the right inputs to them so they can grow there. So those are some of the challenges that we had.
And if I were to paraphrase it, and I don't know if some of you in the startup and smaller companies are growing rapidly, even as a founder, not just as an area manager, but even as a founder, if you say, I got rapid growth this year, doesn't mean that you are capable of getting the growth next year and the next year. You have to skill yourself and change yourself for that next to next year growth. Yeah. So I think that piece is very important. Just because you got growth as an area manager doesn't mean you become capable of ZM. I think as a founder, because you got growth this year doesn't mean you're going to be able to run a scale company somewhere down the line. So that, I think, two parallel processes in startups. One is to say, how do I grow the business? But second is, how do I grow myself to handle a growth business? And these are two different things, and it's very important to think of them in two different ways. Krish, you have seen a lot of people. You have been in HR in 3 big companies, and you've seen one hell of a lot of people managing their careers. What are some of the most common mistakes you see people doing with their careers?
I think this is see, I think careers is a very, very important thing. You know, in the past, when I joined, mid-80s, I joined a Levers. Those days, we kind of said, okay, at least we stay in this company for the next 10 years, 15 years. You say, okay, I will reach that level. So, people thought of long term. But things are changing now. Yeah, I think people now looking at every 2-3 years and say, okay, what should my next thing? But when I look back in terms of what are some of the mistakes people make, I think number one is, I think, 2 things. One is career is like a marathon, yeah? And you got to say, okay, I got to think about it a little more longer term. Sometimes we make a mistake of taking a short-term thing, saying, okay, we all go through lives where we have a tough job, a tough boss, a tough year where, sales is not good. But we got to have some resilience and say, okay, how do I manage it? I think most people, if they lack that resilience, then they'll say, okay, I want to do something else. And that really is one of the big things. So I would like to see the mistake that people make is not looking at career as a longer term thing. The second thing is, sometimes I think people are not looking at saying, okay, the first, and this is something that I picked from Mouli, the first part of your career is pretty easy. We all kind of, keep on, you join, let's say, like a HR manager, you'll go to the next level. The first 10 years is easy. All will grow. If you take sales, you'll be an ASM, you'll do a larger area, you'll be a brand manager, you'll grow for the first 7 years, 10 years, you'll grow. But it's only after that kind of growth, you got to really make that big jump. I think the point is, people at times are so focused on being that operational that they're not picking and making that step to be a little more strategic for the next level, yeah? And to do that, you got to, the early skills are a lot more operational, a lot more analytical skills, but the skills needed at the higher level are a lot more conceptual, a lot more looking at patterns, to work with individuals, etc., which I don't think people develop those. So I think one of the things we need to do in our career is also start developing things which will help you in the leadership part of your career, not just in the operational part of your career. If you divide your career into 2 parts, the operational growth, but then you go on to a strategic leadership growth, but you got to ensure that you make that step. I think that is one of the areas that most people fail, and therefore they kind of go slow at that. So these are some of the challenges that people have seen.
No, and the second one, especially, I want to give you another analogy. I mean, we are a cricket-mad country. So we have 2 levels. We have the Ranji Trophy level, which is interstate cricket. And we have people who qualify for the India team and hence play for India. Do you think the greatest India cricketers have been those who were most successful at Ranji Trophy? Actually, no. It is like that ASM and ZM. To say, you can score a lot of runs at Ranji Trophy. But if you are not at the same time learning how to play for India, which is a different level, then the fact that you score a lot of runs at Ranji Trophy is not going to get the job done. The biggest scorers in Ranji Trophy and the biggest wicket takers in Ranji Trophy have not been successful for India. Because they were so focused on scoring the runs at the Ranji Trophy level, they did not emphasize how to learn to play for India. The people who actually succeeded were those who did well in Ranji Trophy, but at the same time they were very focused on saying, as I play Ranji Trophy, how do I play it in a way where I learn to play for India? So in our working, it is very important. We are so focused on saying, how do I generate results here, that we are to understand that this is Ranji Trophy. Along with generating results here, I have to say, how am I learning to play at the next level? And results is not a guarantee to that. Right? One last question, Krish, which is really around just the learning culture and learning environment. Do you think that all of us are focused enough on learning, reskilling, redeveloping ourselves, continuously growing, or you think there's a way to improve in that?
Well, I think what do I say? No, I think there is a intent. When I look at people and all the ones that I meet, there is a lot of intent. But I think what happens is converting that intent to action is where many of us fail. You know, we all want to do, we all think, but we are not really disciplined enough to converting the intent to action. And the second thing that I think, which is peculiar, which is more so in probably in our Indian environment, is that we are not learners who are good at doing a lot more self-learning, you know, e-learning, self-learning, reflection. We're not that very good at it. You put us in a classroom, good, we'll talk with a few people, you know. I think socially, we learn a lot more socially. But I think the learning has to be a lot more individual. I think somewhere that is one area we seem to be missing. There's a lot of e-learning that goes on. I don't think we do enough of it, whereas some other countries take much more effort to do that. So I think we have to convert that intent a little more to action. And that action has to be a little more concerted in terms of how we do our learning, you know. And that learning has to be across many things. You got to do a little bit of learning on your own, a little bit of reflection, a little bit of practice so that comes. So I think we have to do that loop all through. I think sometimes we don't do all of that. We jump straight to some action. We learn, as in Indians, we learn a lot by action, learn a lot through social learning. But we got to ensure that we try and do all of those. So I think those are all important as we build a learning culture.
And I think that intent to action is possibly, again, going back, and I'll end with the Gita Babita example. Every time somebody says, I'm working hard, I have an intent to learn, but I'm not finding the time to learn. I'm so busy. I have to get this job done. I don't have the time. I'm already stressed. Learning can wait. Learning is not waiting. Your career is waiting. Your career is waiting for you to find time to grow yourself. So the next time you postpone and say, I can't find time, recognize that you're not postponing learning. You're postponing your career success. So please find the intent, find the discipline. I always say, don't be a Gita at work, be a Babita at work. All the very best in your lives. Thank you, Krish, so much for taking the time and giving and sharing your thoughts with this audience. All the best to all of you.